Women, generally speaking, have a few cards stacked against them.
What do you think are some of the unique challenges women face in retirement?
Know where they are, look ahead, and focus on the things they can control to put them in a better position.
Often, women could be more conservative in their kind of investment risk tolerance.
70% of women will fire their advisor.
But are there any other mistakes that maybe you see women making when it comes to retirement planning, how to find a planner, any of those kind of things?
Yeah, I see a couple of mistakes, Joe. One is...
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. I'm your host, Joe Curry, and today I am joined by Russ Thornton. Russ, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Joe. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, happy to have you on. And so today we're going to be talking about kind of women and wealth and retirement planning. And before we jump into all the questions, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and why you're qualified to have this conversation with us today?
Yeah, sure. So I have been a financial advisor for over 30 years now. Started at Merrill Lynch, fresh out of college back in the early 90s. And over my 30 years, I've worked with a variety of clients, as you might imagine. And about 10 or 12 years ago, I found myself working with more and more women through either I was working with a married couple and the husband passed away. I was getting introduced or referred to more and more women that were either on their own or had become widows or had become divorced. And I really found that I enjoyed helping these women both understand their finances and plan ahead for generally retirement, but other things ahead in their lives. That combined with a personal story that I experienced when I was coming out of college, right before I started in this career. My mom and dad went through a divorce. And the short version of a long story is my mom got a lot of assets, money, child support for my two younger brothers who were still at home at the time. And today she is in her late 70s and is relying just on Social Security and a pension that she got out of the divorce. She's gone through all that money and it could have and should have been a very different outcome. And so my brothers and I have seen and continue to deal with that firsthand. And so the small role that I can play in helping women avoid a similar fate, put themselves in a better financial position going forward has been something that I've really embraced and latched onto. And that's kind of what led me to where I am today.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I'm sure that's tough. And I'm sure that's not a unique, I know it's not a unique story. So it's always nice when you're doing something where you can kind of take your experience to help others. So it's great you're able to do that. So let's dive into this a little bit. I mean, retirement planning, it can be complicated, right? I mean, that's why I do this show. I know you have a newsletter. I think it's on YouTube, just helping people, I guess, get retirement planning from a plain English, simplified type of way, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what do you think are some of the unique challenges women face in retirement?
Every person's unique in their own right, but women, generally speaking, have a few cards stacked against them, you could say. On the one hand, they typically live longer than guys than we do.
Yep.
And that's a good thing, but that also means there's a longer life expectancy that they typically have to plan for, combined with the fact that a lot of women choose to not work, or if they're working, they maybe take time away from their career to have children, raise children for a time. So that can be a gap in earning years. And then to top it all off, there have been a lot of studies that show women typically earn less than men for the same role in a lot of companies. I think that's improving, but it's still an issue. So in my experience, women have to typically plan for longer life expectancies, and they may have to do it with fewer financial resources or the opportunity to earn and save as much as maybe if they were a male in the workforce for a full career.
Okay. So, I mean, definitely one of the challenges, I mean, there's a lot, you just mentioned a lot there, but what are people doing, or how should women factor in this idea that they're going to live longer? How does that play out when they're actually doing their retirement planning?
Well, it's a good question, Joe. And that's actually kind of one of the fundamental challenges with retirement planning. If we all knew how long we were going to live, then it would just be a math problem, right? You just kind of plug in the numbers and you kind of figure it out. Not only do we not know how long we're going to live, we don't know what our health is going to be, especially later in life. And so that can really complicate things. And so if a woman needs to plan for, maybe an extra 3 to 5 years potentially on her own, that's going to call for, more savings or the ability to produce more income for a longer period of time. And that also introduces a longer span of time with which she could be faced with additional health challenges, whether that's physical, cognitive, or a combination of the two. And unfortunately, there's not a simple answer to how do you plan for that. I think it takes a lot of introspection and discussion and exploration about how you feel, how you want to plan for that. If a lot of that relies on, family, your support system with maybe adult children or other people in your community. So there's a lot of factors that can play into that discussion, but it's an important discussion and one that certainly needs to be addressed.
Okay. Yep. No, that's totally fair. Now, to go along with this longevity challenge, again, like you said, it's a good thing in a lot of ways, but it can be a challenge just for this planning piece. Also, often women could be more conservative in their kind of investment risk tolerance, which could maybe play an even a bigger factor in that longevity of planning. So how do you help clients overcome their fears and build kind of an investment or investor confidence?
So it's interesting. Women are generally speaking, and clearly there are exceptions, but women are generally speaking maybe a little bit less involved, or I think the word to use, confident, is probably the right term. They're typically just don't have the same level of confidence. I wouldn't call it competence, but because I've found that, most of the women that I interact with are educated, they're smart, they're bright, they understand how the world works. In some respects, they're actually better equipped as investors and planning for themselves because they typically don't chase performance. They typically are better able or better equipped to kind of see the big picture and the role that money plays in their lives. And I've found that to be a big asset. But I've also found that women can sort of let their fears get in the way. There's this concept called the bag lady concept, but it's basically women have this innate fear that they're going to wind up broke and alone. And so there's a lot of, and I'm no psychologist by any stretch, but there's a lot of behavioral issues and psychology that comes into play. And I don't have the solution. There's not a quick fix to any of that. But I think it's important to be willing to sit down with a woman in this case, be patient, and be willing to explore who she is as a person, what's important to her, what her concerns, anxieties, fears are, and then not try to overcome them and not try to diminish them, but acknowledge them and explain or try to paint a picture for them how their emotions, their fears, their anxiety can actually be an asset as it helps better prepare them for the ups and downs of the market. And what I often find, Joe, is that while they can't often afford to just stick the money in the mattress, under the mattress, or bury it in a coffee can in the backyard, they don't typically need to take a lot of risk either. So it's really just help educating them to understand what they can do, what their capabilities are, what the resources are, and how to best marshal those resources in a plan that they're comfortable with that puts them on a good path for the future.
Yeah, I'd agree 100% with that. I think you mentioned the word in there, which I think is really big, is education, right? And to your point, one of our core values is approachability, because we do find, I think some people think, Russ, maybe our industry is a little bit stuffy or a little hard to approach, and people are scared to feel judged, right? So, you definitely want to be with someone who you can feel comfortable and who's not going to judge you, because so many people have, these same struggles or the same kind of, like you said, lack of confidence. So that's normal. It's okay. And going through that process, like you said, having patience and educating. And then I think that you're probably right. I think a lot of women are better suited for long-term success if they have that education, right? And we talk about lack of confidence. I think with men, unfortunately for us, Russ, I think a lot of us men maybe have too much confidence. So it's not really helpful either, but
yeah, absolutely. And I'll throw out one other thing too, Joe. I'd actually be interested to get your thoughts on this. I mean, the financial services industry, Wall Street, however you want to call it, was built by men for men. And I think that can also be not intimidating, but it's just not very welcoming to a lot of women who, don't find a lot of appeal in jargon and, kind of the language that is often spoken around financial services. So I think I love that one of your core values is approachability, because I think that really goes a long way with helping women feel welcomed and understood and giving them a safe space to share, who they are and what's important to them to then kind of lay out a plan going forward.
Yeah, no, I'd agree 100% with everything you just said there. And I think that one of the nice things, and this should be for everybody, but really with dealing with women, is I think that they do a better job of thinking about what does money mean to me rather than just how do I get higher returns or, what's the bottom dollar, right? And so, yeah, the messaging out there in Wall Street and Bay Street up here in Canada, you're right, is very much, I think, geared towards men and about winning and all that kind of stuff. But it is actually nice to do planning with women because I think they really think about more than just the money and like what's the what are we trying to solve with this money, right?
Yeah, and I think their not just their ability, but their willingness to kind of connect the money with its meaning in their life can
Yeah,
actually, again, help them see past maybe their fear, their anxiety, their lack of confidence to create a plan, an investment strategy, a financial strategy that's going to help them live the life that they want to live, as opposed to kind of shrinking back in fear or concern, whether those are real or perceived.
for sure. For sure. So if we're thinking about kind of the financial planning, retirement planning process, before diving in, if someone has not yet done this, what are some of the key metrics women should be looking at to understand where they are in terms of their retirement readiness and what the next steps are?
So I always tell people the best place to start is where you are now. And I find so many people, women and men, don't really understand their current financial standing. And I think in simple terms, it's best to understand what you earn. So whether that's a paycheck or you're self-employed, you own a business, whatever the case may be, what you own. So that can be car, house, investment assets, whatever the case may be, and what you owe. So if you have any debts, mortgage, car loans, credit card debt, things like that. I think getting a clear picture of where you are currently and thinking in terms of what you earn, what you own, and what you owe is a great place to start. That doesn't by any stretch cover all the bases, but that provides a great level of understanding because once you have a sense of those three things, I think that puts you in a much better position to start thinking ahead to, okay, well, if I want to change things, if I want to improve my situation, if I want to create a plan for the future, now I know where I stand and I know where to, what direction to go to put myself in a better position for the future.
Yeah, for sure. If you want to go from point A to point B, it's helpful to know where point A is to start.
Absolutely.
Now, you probably hear this. I know I hear this. People ask, how much, what's the magic number? How much do I need to have saved so I can retire? So there's probably not a specific answer to knowing what your magic number is, but how would you help someone start to understand how much they need to be saving for retirement? And especially, if we're thinking, maybe we're talking to somebody who's 5 years out from retirement, they've kind of figured out where they're at today, but like, how do you help them figure that number out or that approach to reach their goals?
Yeah. So the short answer is we kind of start with the end in mind. So I would tell someone that's 5 years from retirement to say, hey, imagine you're retired. How much do you think you'll need on a week to week or month to month basis to maintain a standard of living that you're comfortable with, to allow you to do the things you both need to do, but as also the things you want to do, whether that's, hobbies, sports, travel, time with family, whatever the case may be. And so let's say a client says, well, I need $8,000 a month to live my life. Well, then from that, we can kind of back into, well, they might have some income from Social Security that could contribute to that. They might have a pension that could contribute to that. And so let's say that they have between pension and Social Security, let's say they've got $2,500 a month coming in. That means we need to make up another $5,500 a month. And so that would probably mean we need to look at their portfolio, their accumulated savings, investments, things like that to see if those numbers work. Do they have enough of a pool of money saved up that they can reliably produce roughly $5,500 a month, adjusted for inflation, for the rest of their life? And going back to kind of where the conversation started, we don't know how much or how long the rest of their life is. And so we need to build some cushion or some buffer in there to account for some longer longevity, to account for surprises along the way, because if we give a client $8,000 a month, that's not always going to cover, replacing a roof on their home or, replacing their automobile and things like that. So you're right. There's not a simple answer I don't believe there is a number, but I think there's a way to narrow down what the range of numbers might look like to give the person the highest level of comfort and confidence that once they reach retirement, once they stop working and their paycheck goes away, that they'll be okay.
Okay, perfect. So in Canada, we have the CPP or Canada Pension Plan and Elected Security. You guys have Social Security. And for a lot of people, that's going to be a major retirement income source. So what are some key strategies, or are there some key strategies thinking about like single women, maybe in particular, that people should be thinking about as they're approaching and into retirement?
You know, to give an example around Social Security specifically, in most situations, a woman can take it as early as 62 or as late as age 70. The longer they wait, the higher the benefit amount. But does that mean that it's always best to wait till age 70 to get the higher benefit amount? Well, clearly not, because they might need to have the income coming in sooner, even at a reduced amount. And frankly, it's not always about solving for the greatest amount of wealth. It's about solving for the person living their best life. And so if I could leave your listeners with one thing from our conversation, it's about focusing on your needs, your unique situation, and looking beyond the numbers or the equations or the finances or the spreadsheets, and truly working with someone like Joe or someone like myself to come up with a plan that is best suited to your situation. So Social Security is just one example, but I think it requires a very holistic approach and a holistic view of your life and what you're trying to accomplish. And that will weigh into a decision like, do I take Social Security as early as 62 or do I take it at age 70? And how does that match up with other income sources, my income needs? How does that match up with when I want to retire versus when I can afford to retire? And so I hate not to give you a better answer to your question, but it's a good question. It's kind of the question, but I think it just illustrates the need to take a comprehensive, holistic view of your situation to make the best decisions that are going to best suit your situation.
Yeah, no, I love that. I couldn't agree more. And we talk a lot about on here, like with CPP, kind of the rule of thumb or default is that most people are going to be better off by delaying. But problem with that is it's a rule of thumb and it's not unique to anyone's situation. So I like kind of what you're saying there. At the end of the day, rather than just going off some rule of thumb or what you heard somebody else say, we really want to be intentional about this type of planning.
Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Okay. So some other kind of maybe financial barriers or mindset challenges that women specifically might face are often trying to, maybe trying to balance that saving or spending for retirement with other priorities, like maybe paying off debt if they only are a single income home, or maybe supporting children and grandchildren. So how do you talk to women about finding the right balance?
So the analogy I use often is if you've ever flown on a commercial plane and they go through the safety demonstration, they always tell you to put the mask on yourself first before you help others. I think the idea holds true here. I encounter all the time where women are in a situation where they're caring for their aging parents, they're maybe caring for a spouse, they want to support their adult children, and they're so focused on helping others that they can often do that at their own peril, that it could jeopardize their own financial situation. So I think whether it's managing debt or helping out family or loved ones and providing them support, you need to make sure that you focus on your well-being first, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. And then once you've got that locked down and you feel comfortable and confident in your own situation, then you can certainly explore what you're willing and able to do for others. I find that comes up a lot in my conversations with clients. With regard to the debt thing, I also find that a lot of people always think in terms of either or. Do I save for retirement or do I pay off debt? And in my mind, it shouldn't be either or, it should be and. How do I pay down my debt and save for retirement? And so don't be wary thinking about in binary terms of it's this or that. There's typically ways to do both at the same time. And I've found that's typically the best path forward to allow people to work on multiple things at the same time without having to sacrifice one or the other.
Okay, that's great. And this is probably a continuation of what you were just saying there, but I think that maybe a lot of women feel like they've fallen behind because maybe they haven't got that balance right up to this point. or maybe they've gone through a divorce, which has set them behind, or they didn't have a partner contributing income to the household. It's been all on them all along. So is there any other advice you'd have for someone who's maybe feeling like they've fallen behind or they're starting this process later in life?
Yeah, I hate the fact that this sounds kind of cliched, but it's never too late to get started. The best time to get started is now. If you've done things in the past to save or pay down debt or put yourself in a better financial position, acknowledge and congratulate yourself. But you need to look ahead and not think about missed opportunities, but think about opportunities ahead of you. What can I do now to put myself in a better position tomorrow or 5 years from now or 10 years from now? I have some clients that have retired and they have decided that they would like to actually spend a little bit less than they could afford to spend in retirement because they want to have additional cushion later in life should they have a healthcare need or should they need to or want to help their family, their children, whatever the case may be. And so just know that you always have choice and there are always things within your control. The problem arises when people focus too much on things that are outside their control. They're focused on the news or the investment markets or interest rates or politics. I'm not saying those aren't important, but I think it's a better use of time and energy to focus on things that you can control and directly influence, like how much you're saving, how much you're spending, when you want to retire now versus later, because that's going to dictate how much you can afford to spend in retirement. So that's a big question, Joe. I don't know that I did a very good job of answering it, but I think it's really just something where women need to know where they are, look ahead, and focus on the things they can control to put them in a better position tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, just to focus on what you can control, not just from your planning, but also I guess on your website, Russ, that you're an evidence-based planner, or like philosophy, evidence-based investing. So that's I think a good lesson for anyone listening too when it comes to your investments also, which is a bit of a side note here, but focus on what you can control is important advice.
Yeah. Amen.
Now, if we're thinking about someone who is maybe, so they've done some planning, they want to retire, they're not quite there. I think a lot of people, when they hear us say the word retirement, they think that it means that they just have to stop working today. So what would you say to someone who is maybe they're in their 60s, maybe they've done a pretty good job, but if they start drawing too much from their investments right now, then they're going to run into trouble later on. Like, what would you say to them about other options, like potentially part-time work, starting their own business, other things that could help get them through that stretch?
Yeah, so retirement, I characterize a lot of what I do around retirement and retirement planning. I don't really like that word. It was developed in a time when our life expectancies were much shorter. We did a lot of manual labor. It was not uncommon for someone to quote unquote retire and then maybe have 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 years and then they passed away. Today, people are retiring and it's very likely they're going to live another 25 or 30 years. And that number is probably only going to increase over time. And so for someone that is looking to retire in the traditional sense, I would rather frame the idea as financial independence or another way to think of it as work optional. And so if you're in a job that you hate and it's just sucking the life out of you and you're looking to hit the eject button as soon as possible, that's one thing. I think another way to think about retirement, though, is to maybe consider your option to transition to another line of work that you find more rewarding, that you find fulfilling, and something that you look forward to doing every day. Maybe not something you want to do every day for the rest of your life, but if you were, let's say you're in a job today and you're 60 and you cannot imagine working past 62, maybe you transition to another job, maybe something that pays less, but you find more fulfilling and it's something you could see doing until you're late 60s or 70 or later. So that's one option. As you mentioned, Joe, you can certainly look at part-time work or consulting. There are a lot of other things you can do that aren't necessarily going to provide income, but with your time, you can mentor, you can volunteer. So there's a lot of things you can do to both spend your time and to find fulfillment in your life. Many of those include a paycheck or earnings. Some don't, but I would encourage anyone listening to have a very open mind and be willing to think a little bit outside the box about ways to not just continue to earn income, not just to continue to support your, whether we call it retirement or financial independence or work optional life, but also ways to help you enjoy a life that you want to live and that you want to get up excited about every day. Because, for people that are stuck in a job that they hate, I just cannot imagine a worse hell. And so, but very rarely are you stuck. So think about other ways or other options you may have to continue to earn income and maybe do it for a longer period of time.
I love that. Sounds like I'm listening to myself talk a little bit right now, Russ. I'm sure anyone who's listened to a few episodes have probably heard me say the same things about retirement and how we don't really love that word, but we also use it because it's what people expect. But work optional is a much better choice of words, I think. Okay, we've talked about some things, but are there any other mistakes that maybe you see women making when it comes to whether it's retirement, whether it's, figuring out how to get started with retirement planning, how to find a planner, any of those kind of things?
Yeah, I see a couple of mistakes, Joe. One is that they literally just get so overwhelmed with the idea of planning for retirement or taking control of their financial situation that they just kind of retreat into themselves and they don't do anything. So it's kind of, call it paralysis analysis, or they just stick their head in the sand. But and that's probably the worst mistake you can make, is just, kicking the can down the road and thinking, I'll deal with this tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. Because increasingly, governments, pensions, things like that, pensions are typically going away, at least here in the US. You're increasingly going to need to be responsible for your own retirement planning. So that's probably mistake number one. Mistake number two, and we kind of referenced this a moment ago, asking about somebody that's maybe at a late start or needs to maybe do some catching up. I often find that they think, all right, well, to make up for lost time, I need to swing for the fences. I need to take a lot of risk. I need to really put myself in an uncomfortable place to catch up for lost time. And that is rarely the solution either, because you run the risk of doing more damage and actually backing yourself up even more than maybe you are right now, because you're trying to make up for lost time and you might wind up taking one step forward and 3 or 4 or 5 steps backwards. And the final thing I will say is that I find that a lot of people, women included, don't do a good enough job of vetting their sources of financial advice. And so they'll ask a family friend or maybe their tax preparer, their CPA or whomever, someone from church, hey, I need to start planning for my retirement. Who you recommend? They go with the first name they're given. And while I believe most financial advisors and planners out there are good people and they want to do the right thing, sadly, there are a lot of people in our industry that aren't. And it's actually infuriating the number of times when I've kind of come in after the fact and have to clean up a mess, that there's a lot of expenses and costs and taxes and things like that. So I would tell people in general, but women especially, be very skeptical and be very wary about who you take financial advice from, whether that's hiring an advisor or listening to a family friend or someone from church. You need to look out for your best interest. If you're going to hire an advisor, I would recommend someone that works on a fee only or fee basis. And I would at least talk to 3 and be willing to ask them very pointed questions like, how do you get compensated? What conflicts of interest do you have, if any? And you really need to advocate for yourself, because if you're going to take financial advice from someone, you need to know that they have your best interests at heart.
Yeah, no, I love that. Absolutely. I don't know about you, Russ. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, but I know we have a pretty significant percentage of our clients are actually single females from one reason or another. And we get them because of different reasons. One, maybe they're a widow and their husband had an advisor, but never really gave them the time of day. So they weren't comfortable going back there. Or they were working with another advisor on their own, but they just felt like they were maybe not taken seriously. And often we're getting more and more now clients coming to us, couples where the husband, not always the husband, but often the husband has been doing everything, and they actually want to make sure there's some continuity there for their spouse if something were to happen to them. And so, which is great because we're really getting them both involved in the planning. But what are some reasons why you're seeing your clients, like how are they finding you or why are they coming to you?
I've had the exact same experience, Joe. It's women are referred to me either on their own. I've actually had like elderly fathers like that are in their 70s or 80s say, "Hey, I want you to meet with and talk to my adult daughter because I want someone to look after her and make sure she's getting good advice. It's been a few years ago, but I think it was Fidelity did a study that said that within 12 months after the loss of a spouse, most women will, 70% of women will fire their advisor. And the two primary reasons were because either the advisor ignored them, didn't communicate with them, or if they communicated with them, they did it in a condescending tone, like they're almost talking down to them, which I can't imagine. I'm sure you can't either, but
Yeah.
I guess that happens. And so, so yeah, it really begs the question about, why wait if you're not involved in the financial decision and planning conversations in your household. I don't think that that's something you should leave to chance and wait until you're on your own and then have to face those decisions, without a partner. So I think it provides an opportunity for advisors like you and I, Joe, but it's also a challenge for women that aren't equipped or don't have the resources to better evaluate their sources of financial advice.
Yeah, sure. And what about what would you say to someone who's maybe they're not working with a financial planner right now, but they're kind of deciding whether it would be a good idea for them? Like, at what point should someone consider working with an advisor or a planner?
Clearly, I'm biased. I think that I think advisors play an important role and could help most people. Having said that, I don't think that I'm the best advisor for everyone. There are lots of people out there, women and men alike, who are educated, capable. They have the time and they have the interest to get into this get their hands dirty and to understand investments, tax planning, retirement income, estate planning, the whole ball of wax. And if they are, I wish them the best. Where I find that I can often provide the most help and the most value. This probably is true for you too, as well, Joe. Is for folks that either don't have the time or don't have the interest. They've got things they'd rather do with their time. They'd rather spend time with family or traveling or whatever. And so for those women, that's where I can really step in, partner with them, get everyone on the same page, give them a plan, and add a lot of value. But at the same time, I'll be very transparent about the fact that if there's a woman out there that feels like she's capable, has the interest, and has the time, I wouldn't try to convince her otherwise.
Yeah, no, I'd agree 100%. I'd say some of some of our clients are some of the smartest people that I know, are smarter than me anyway, but it's to your point, is this is not how they want to spend their time, is staying on top of this stuff and putting it all together. And like I said a few minutes ago, often there's also a continuity piece. Even if they're able to do it, is their spouse willing and able or wanting to like, if something were to happen, right? So there's a continuity piece there.
Yeah, and you're right. That's super important as well.
Okay. So I know earlier you said if you could leave everyone with one thing, it would be intentional. Well, I'm maybe using my own words here, paraphrasing, but I think it was be intentional about planning for your unique situation rather than taking the one size fits all. Is there anything else? If you could have one more thing, what would you want people to take away from this conversation?
I agree that that's probably the most important piece of our conversation. But beyond that, I would say just know that even though retirement planning, personal finances can feel overwhelming, it can feel complex, it doesn't need to be. It can be very simple and yet still be super effective. And I could give several examples, but just know that in my opinion and from my experience, simple is better. A lot of financial advisors, a lot of people in the financial services industry rely on complexity. And in my experience, they often do that so they can charge higher fees or a variety of other reasons. But your life and your money does not need to be complex. Life is crazy enough as it is. Why would you want to add additional complexity when it comes to your money? I think it should be simple. It should be something you understand. It should be something you should be able to understand to your 6-year-old granddaughter, and she should be able to understand it, at least at a high level. So I would say, in addition to having meaning, purpose, and understanding what that is, and I think this goes hand in hand, is keep things simple. It doesn't need to be, complex. It doesn't need to be another. And then when you go to meet with someone like Joe, that should not be a source of anxiety. It should be something like, oh, I'm looking forward to catching up with Joe, seeing where things stand, et cetera, et cetera. And so I place a high premium on keeping things simple.
I love that. I think you're speaking our language here at Your Retirement Planning Simplified. So, Russ, where can listeners find you, follow along, or connect if they want to learn more?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. The best place to start is my website, wealthcareforwomen.com. I also maintain a Substack for those that are familiar. It's basically a platform to send out my weekly email newsletter, but you can find that from my website. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I have a YouTube channel as well under my name where I am not very consistent, but occasionally post a video there as well. But those are probably the main places to catch up with me. And if I can answer any questions or if anyone wants to start up a dialogue, feel welcome to reach out.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, Russ. So for everybody listening, we'll have all the resources and the links for Russ on retirementplanningsimplified.ca. So look for the episode with Russ Thornton, and we'll have that on there. So before we sign off, if you know a woman who's approaching or in retirement who should hear this episode, feel free to share it with them. We want to make sure we're getting the message out to as many people we can to help them simplify their retirement. So Russ, thanks again for joining us today. And I'm sure our listeners are going to have some good takeaways.
Thanks, Joe. I enjoyed the conversation.